one is Introduction to the Kabbalah. This is meant to be a very beginner-friendly webinar, and our intention here is to start offering some basic webinars on esoteric fundamentals. So probably a 2 or 3 part series on the Kabbalah, 2-part series on astrology, 2-part series on alchemy, several series on Gnosticism, early Christianity, and Christian mysticism. We'll have introductions to practical ceremonial magic, as well as things like introductions to Martinism and to the Yellow Kohen, to things like that. So today is our first one, and this is going to be, again, like I said, a very beginner-friendly introduction to Kabbalah. Now, there's a million Kabbalistic texts and books out there. The intention of this webinar and future ones is to try and distill some of those thick texts, distill a lot of those things into an easily digestible format to where you can get started with studying these things. For me personally, at least, it felt like I had to read about 5 pretty thick books on the Kabbalah before I really understood anything. Because you're literally learning a new language. You are learning Hebrew letters, you're learning symbolism, you're learning an entire new way of thinking. And if we can present to people the primary core doctrines, the primary teachings, and most importantly, motivate you to start learning your Hebrew letters, learning your elements, your planets, your zodiacal signs, how the general tree of life works that you see there on the left, then I think that'll help people to ascend that learning curve faster. So with that, this will focus on the theory and practice, on the doctrines, philosophy, and magical applications of the Kabbalah, primarily through Isaac Luria, Hermeticism, and then the initiatory traditions of the Golden Rosenkreuz and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. There are many versions of the Tree of Life. There are many styles of Kabbalah as well. Today, we're going to focus upon the more general Hermetic versions as a way to dive into the deep end. Okay? So what is Kabbalah, or what is Kabbalah? From the Rabbinical Hebrew, the word means tradition or correspondence. From the root word kabel, it can mean receive or accept. Its import is that of to give and to receive, giving and receiving. It implies that of the oral tradition of Hebrew mysticism, taught from master to disciple, from mouth to ear, in which a dynamic interplay of giving and receiving results in illumination of the soul. This is the secret oral tradition of the Torah being the Old Testament, specifically the entire Old Testament, but specifically the Pentateuch and the 5 books of Moses especially. This is the Holy Kabbalah is the ancient Jewish tradition of mystical interpretation of the Bible. This was first transmitted orally and through the use of esoteric methods such as ciphers and symbols. It reached the height of its influence in kosher Judaism in the Middle Ages, and it has since evolved to encompass mystical Christianity, esotericism in all forms in the West, Western mystery schools such as Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry, and pretty much every mystical school of the Enlightenment era. It is a foundational system of the Western mystery tradition or Western esoteric tradition, and it is something that I believe that every Mason, every Martinist, obviously Golden Dawn, any esotericist in general should be at least fundamentally versed in the basics of the Kabbalah. So let's talk about some reasons why we study Kabbalah. Starting with a Masonic perspective from Albert Pike, from his Morals and Dogma of the Ancient Accepted Scottish Rite. He says that the Holy Kabbalah, or the tradition of the children of Seth, was carried from Chaldea by Abraham, taught to the Egyptian priesthood by Joseph, recovered and purified by Moses, concealed under symbols in the Bible, revealed by the Savior to St. John, and contained entire under hieratic figures analogous to those of all antiquity in the apocalypse of that apostle. That is the book of Revelations, or the Apocalypse of John, of course. And there you see an image of the temple or the tabernacle, depending how you look at it, most of the temple, of Jerusalem with the 7-branch candlestick, the table of shewbread, and the altar of incense. And there in the east, the veil of the Holy of Holies, which we'll be talking about much more in depth a little bit later. And on to another perspective. This is a picture of Eliphas Levi. He was a Catholic deacon who, before fully entering the priesthood, one of the stories is that he basically fell in love and decided not to take his vows of chastity. So he ended up leaving the church and delved very deep into occultism and became one of the most influential writers of the French occult revival. So the purpose of the Kabbalah, according to Levi, is to study and comprehend, number one, patriarchal traditions on the holy mystery of God and the divine persons. Number two, to study the spiritual creation and the fall of angels. 3, the origin of chaos, matter, and the renovation of the world during 6 days of creation. And number 4, the creation of visible man, his fall, and the divine ways leading to his reinstatement. Okay, so that's getting into the Judeo-Christian mythos that is the core of the Kabbalistic tradition. Continuing on to someone a little more modern, we have S.L. MacGregor Mathers. He was one of the key founders of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in 1888. He was also a very prominent Freemason in England, very influential in the SRIA, the Masonic Rosicrucian body. And in his book, Kabbalah Unveiled, which was one of the first translations of Kabbalah Denodata, he outlines 10 studies for Kabbalists. Number 1, the supreme being, his nature and his attributes. So God, for lack of a better term. Number 2, cosmology, the universe, the nature of creation. 3, the creation of angels and of man. 4, the destiny of man and angels. 5, nature of the soul. 6, the nature of the angels, demons, and elementals. 7, the import of the revealed law. 8, the transcendental symbolism of numerals. So Pythagoreanism, number theory, specifically gematria. We don't use the term numerology because that gets conflated with modern New Age movements. Number 9, the peculiar mysteries contained in the Hebrew letters, which we'll be talking much more in depth in a few slides. And number 10, the equilibrium of contraries, so the study of polarities, of opposites, and their eventual recombination. And then Israel Regardie, moving now into the 20th century, he was a student of the Golden Dawn. He was a student of Aleister Crowley. He was his personal secretary for a couple of years, and then he was initiated later into the Stella Matutina. He says that the philosophy of Kabbalah is a philosophy of evolution. The universe, with all its planets and worlds and independent beings, was conceived to be an emanation from a primeval substance principle, which some people have called God, the Absolute, the Infinite, the All, and so forth. In the Kabbalah, this principle, which is the one reality, is named Ein Sof, the Infinite. So that's quite a mouthful. He covers a lot of things there, and he covers a lot of terms spanning various traditions, and that's why we chose that. So you might have noticed here that we had Kabbalah spelled with a K. We have it here spelled with a Q. You've also seen it spelled with a C. And you can consider those to be 3 of the primary manifestations of the Kabbalistic tradition today. The K is generally used for kosher or Hebraic Kabbalah. The C is generally used for Christian Kabbalah, which arose in the early Middle Ages, especially with individuals like Pico della Mirandola and his work with the tarot. And then you have the Q Kabbalah, which is probably the more predominant Kabbalah of magicians these days. That is the Hermetic Kabbalah that was highly influenced by groups like the Golden Rosenkreuz, and then essentially formed and settled by the Golden Dawn. Moving on to that, this next slide shows us the general tree of life and the pillars of wisdom, strength, and beauty, which should be familiar to any Freemason or anyone who's studied Qabalah, the Golden Dawn, etc., etc. That tree you see on the right is the version we're all generally familiar with, right? And that is only one of dozens of styles of trees in the way the Sephiroth are arranged and the way that the paths are arranged, the colors that are attributed to them. Those are all coming directly from the Golden Dawn and from the work that Mathers and Westcott did to codify the Kabbalah, into a full initiatory system for magicians. In future videos, we will go more in depth into other versions of the tree and show how you can play with it and use it in different ways. But for the purpose of this introductory video, we're going to use this standard Western tree here, okay? So you see those 3 pillars of the Masonic Lodge. Strength on the left, the black, the red, and the orange sphere represents severity. It is all that is, in this case, actually the feminine, the black sphere. It is the pillar of the feminine, the pillar of strength. Of course, masculine and feminine go both ways. Every Sephiroth, every pillar has masculine and feminine qualities. But let's just go with it being feminine for the moment. On the right, you have the pillar of wisdom, starting with the gray sphere, then flowing down to the blue sphere, then down to the green sphere. That would be the pillar of wisdom, or, as you could also call it, mercy, or loving kindness. And then in the center, you have the white, the root of everything, the all, the infinite, down to the yellow, flowing down to the purple, down to the earth. And that's colored in earth colors, right? Very earthy colors. That middle pillar, that balance between positive and negative, male and female, wisdom and strength, mercy and severity, is what we call the pillar of beauty, the pillar of mildness, the central column. You could also liken these to the Ida and the Pingala of the Eastern chakra system, with the central pillar being the Sushumna. Now, we're going to go in depth into what these things are, but first let's talk about primary types of Kabbalah. Like we said, there's the kosher, the Christian, the Hermetic. But amongst all that, let's say there's 4 different types of Kabbalah. Number 1, the dogmatic Kabbalah. This would be dogma meaning teaching. This is the study of ancient literature, such as rabbinical texts, such as the Sepher Yetzirah, the Book of Formation. And this is a very short text, actually. It's more of a pamphlet than it is a book, that displays the creation of the universe through the 22 Hebrew letters. It's very short. There are several versions of it, and it's one of those books that you should start reading if you haven't done so. Then there's the Bahir, which literally means the Book of Illumination, Sepher Bahir, and that is also a Kabbalistic midrash. By midrash, we're talking about two rabbis that are essentially getting together and rapping about the mysteries. They're getting together and rapping about what is God. Another one of those primary books is called the Sepher Ratziel HaMalak, or the Book of Ratziel the Angel. And this is a collection of esoteric writings from around the 13th century. And it is when we start to see magical Kabbalah really come into play. It is essentially a mystical midrash and creation, detailing Jewish ceremonial magic, an elaborate angelology, magical use of the zodiac, gematria, names of God, protective spells, and creation of magical talismans. Okay, so you see that influence, that book really took a splash in the Renaissance and helped to create a lot of the grimoire traditions and then now esoteric orders we have. Then we have the Zohar, the Book of Splendor. This is probably considered the most important, or at least the lengthiest, of the traditional Kabbalistic treatises. At times, it even reaches canonical status as a part of the oral Torah, or the oral Old Testament. It was compiled by 13th century Spanish rabbi named Moses de Leon, and it is attributed to a 2nd century rabbi, Shimon bar Yochai. Originally, it was published in 3 volumes. Generally, today, most of the English versions are publishing them in 22 separate volumes, one for each letter. So it takes up an entire shelf in your bookcase. I was speaking to a Masonic brother about this 2 nights ago, and he had heard this previous talk about 3 weeks ago, and he went home and bought the Zohar. And I'm like, what do you mean you bought the Zohar? He's like, he actually got all 22 books shipped to him. So talk about diving in the deep end. And then there's Eitz Chaim, Tree of Life. And this is a collection of teachings by the Rabbi Isaac Luria, who is known as the Ari, which means lion. And we'll see later that that is very significant. Remember that Christ is considered the lion of the tribe of Judah, the Ari. So the Ari was a major rabbi who really codified Kabbalah. And when we look at modern-day Kabbalah, especially Golden Dawn, Hermetic Kabbalah, 90% of it comes from the Ha'ari. It comes from Isaac Luria. Luria never actually wrote anything down. So Eitz Chaim, the Tree of Life, is actually a collection of writings from his disciple, Chaim Vital. It was first published in the 16th century, obviously in Hebrew. And it is now beginning to get a proper set of translations. I've been reading Menzi Pade's version of this, actually. He's got one of his books out so far. So there's your traditional dogmatic, studying the texts, the holy books. Then we get into practical Kabbalah, which is where we're going to spend a lot of our time in the future classes, okay? But we have to get there. Practical Kabbalah is initiation, meditations, visions, talismans, ceremonial magic. Over there on the right, you see a splice of the tree, the bottom spheres, and this specific version comes from the AA, the Argentium Astrum of Aleister Crowley. It's his initiatory schema, which was based off that of the Golden Dawn. And essentially, in this initiatory schema, you're going to start at the bottom of the tree. You should be able to see my cursor, in Malkut and Earth. You're going to move up to the air and the moon. You're going to move over to water and Mercury. You're going to move over to fire and Venus. And then finally, you're going to bring it all together in your first initiation of the sun. And we'll get into that deeper. But practical Kabbalah, these are guys like Cornelius Agrippa, his 3 books of occult philosophy. Agrippa was a major Renaissance occultist. I was in Oxford a few months ago, and we had the pleasure of visiting the Bodleian libraries. One of my friends is a librarian there, so we were able to see all the back exhibits and stuff. And they found, when they were restoring the building about 100 years ago, that during the Enlightenment period, that library dates back to the 1500s, first of all. So they found when they were restoring it that during the Enlightenment period, they had whitewashed the walls because that was the style. So they had painted over all the frescoes. And when they're cleaning, they rediscovered these frescoes. And in the oldest reading room, all along one wall, for probably half a football field in length, there are beautiful hand-painted frescoes of all the philosophers, going from the Greeks all the way up. On the opposite side are frescoes of all the scientists, from all the way back to, the Renaissance. And I saw that Agrippa was in one of those frescoes, and he was not with the philosophers. He was placed with the scientists. And that just goes to show that the things we study as occult philosophy, occult science, mysticism, things that are often seen as superstition today by Muggles, that these things were the forefront of science. And one of the things I hope that people can take away from this is that the mysticism of the Hebrews is very akin to a lot of the philosophy coming out of quantum physics these days. And that perhaps the two, science and religion, should not be so divorced. Perhaps maybe we can readopt in our own lives the method of science and the aim of religion. So other aspects of practical Kabbalah, these are Christian theurgy and Hermeticism. So mystical meditations. You could perhaps even lump in St. John of the Cross. He wasn't a Kabbalist, but he definitely touches the same mystical ideas. The tarot of Pico della Mirandola. The French Masonic rites of the Elo Cohen. The Martinism of Saint Martin and Papus. Initiatory orders such as the Golden Rosenkreuz. They were the first order to truly use the Tree of Life as an initiatory schema. The SRIA of Masons that also used that same grade schema. And then the Golden Dawn, which again used the Tree of Life as their initiatory process. The third type of primary Kabbalah is that of the literal Kabbalah. And these are the sciences, the arts of Gematria, Temura, and Notarikon. Those basically mean Kabbalistic manipulation and permutation, playing with the letters themselves. The letters, numbers, words, and phrases of biblical texts to find hidden meanings and connections. The base form of this would be modern day numerology, which does not have the same foundation and biblical sense as Gematria does. If you're not familiar with Gematria is the idea that every Hebrew letter, well, it's not an idea, it's a fact, that every Hebrew letter represents a number. The Hebrews didn't have Roman numerals. They didn't use numbers the same way we did. So they don't have a 1, 2, 3, and 4. Aleph, A, the first letter also represents 1. Bayet, B, represents 2, etc., etc. Through the 22 letters, you get all the numbers of the universe, essentially. So whenever you're reading the Bible, you can take a word and you can turn those letters into the numbers they represent. You can do further manipulations, and you can look up words that have those same numerical values, and they're said to be a hidden connection to them. For example, when you look up the word Messiah or Mashiach, the Messiah, and you look up the word Nechashatan, which the Masons incorrectly spell on their 23rd degree jewel. They spell it not Shatan. When you look up that word, the serpent and the Messiah, they have the same number, 358. So there's said to be a link between the serpent of Genesis and the Messiah. That might sound very strange to someone who's only studied exoteric Christianity, but it's a concept very familiar to anyone who's studied Gnostic texts or who's read books like Elaine Pagel's Adam, Eve, and the Serpent, The Origin of Evil, or The Origin of Satan, as well as the Gnostic Gospels, etc. It's showing that perhaps that serpent was a liberator, but that's for something else. And that's only one version of the myth. Temura's permutation of letters. That's taking things like divine names, Yod He Vav He, which the fact that we're saying that word shows that we're not actual Jews. A Jew wouldn't actually say Yahweh or Yahweh. This would be completely blasphemous. They would, if they were going to write the holy name in Hebrew or even in English, then that piece of paper it's written or printed on now is to be treated in a special way because it is holy. It has God on it. So to get around that, they'll change the letters around. Like they'll write it Havaya, which means existence. It's another example of what God is. God is existence. I am that I am. So without getting too much into it, we'll get into those things in another lesson. Temura, you can take divine names and permutate them. For example, there's 12 tribes of Israel, each with their 12 banners, each with one of the 12 zodiacal signs, each also attributed to perhaps one of the 12 patriarchs of Israel. Each one of those 12 banners will have a permutation of Yod He Vav He. There will be Yod He Vav He Vav He Yod, Vav He Yod He Yod Vav He, etc., etc., to create different patterns of the deity manifesting itself. Lastly, there's Notarikon, which is the one we're probably most familiar with in mundane life, and that is essentially a modern-day anagram, like CIA. One of the famous ones is Agalah in Hebrew, A-G-L-A, and that's actually an anagram for Ata Gibor Leolam Adonai. Thou art mighty in eternity, O Lord. And there are numerous examples of this throughout Scripture. Over there on the right, you have an image of the Shem HaMephoresh. Those are 72 permutations of a three-lettered name of deity that comes from Exodus. I think it's chapter 19, verses 19 and 21, something like that. But you basically take the first verse, write it right to left, like Hebrew. Second verse, go down a column, a row. Left to right, go down a row, right to left. And then you take each one of those columns with 3 letters. That's a trigram that represents one aspect of divinity divided into 72. Then you add an El or a Yah, which are suffixes that represent angelic forces, and you have 72 angels of the Shem. We will have an extensive class on that in the future. Once I finish my new book on that, Liber Shem, and it'll be an expose on the tarot, Tree of Life in 4 Worlds, 72 Shem angels, and how to work them mystically and magically for both mundane forms of magic as well as inner theurgy. And lastly, we have the unwritten Kabbalah. These are oral traditions, and specifically the gnosis, the experience, the peak experience, the reason why we're studying this, which is to have direct knowledge, direct communion with deity, without the need of an intermediary. Any intermediary, any priest, any rabbi, any initiator in the Western Esoteric tradition should always be understood as only a temporary mediator, a temporary assistant. And all they're doing is showing you the path that they've been down and showing you the same loving kindness and care that someone hopefully gave to them and passing that on in the golden chain. So these are the secret Western Esoteric tradition, all initiatory traditions that we work today. And there on the right, that is an image from the Book of the Lamb Spring, one of my favorite alchemical texts. And it's an image of the man, the prince, the young king, being brought to the top of the mountain by his angel, and then seeing everything unfold around him. Next we have your first homework lesson. By the way, I am working on a text, like I said. If you shoot me an email or a Facebook PM, I will send you a free PDF of the draft. It's about 55 pages, right? 45 pages right now. Okay, that's symbolic. Adam. 45 pages, and it's got everything we're talking about in it. And I'd like to send it to you so that you start doing homework on it, so that you learn your 22 Hebrew letters. If you see that chart on the right. My email is, let's use grandmaster at martinism.net. Here, I will type it in right now, okay? Check. And I'll post that in the Facebook later. That table on the right is something that, if you're going to study Kabbalah, you might as well just learn this now. Because just like you have to learn the 10 spheres, the paths, the elements, the zodiacal signs, the planets, which is the core of today's lesson, you need to learn these tables in order to be able to understand when they're brought up. The Tree of Life can be likened to a filing cabinet. If we get really base on it, take out the spirituality for a moment, and just put in a system, it is like a filing cabinet with 32 drawers. There's 10 spheres, 22 paths, 32 drawers. And you should be able to pull out, you should understand first the label in each drawer, all 32 of these, which span the entirety of human consciousness and existence and experience. Within those 32 drawers, you should be able to classify every deity of every tradition or religion, all forms of color, sound, smell, experience in general, angels, spirits, all kinds of stuff. So as you begin to accumulate esoteric knowledge, your filing cabinet just gets filled bigger and bigger, and you're able to learn more faster and retain it better because you have this foundational cabinet in your consciousness. So for example, whenever I hear the letter Yud, I instantly think of, that is this letter right here. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor. It's just a little dash. It's a little paintbrush going down, like a little Zen image. And it literally represents a sperm. It represents a seed. It is the first seed of deity. And it is the first name of the divine name, of the name of God, Yahweh. Yud, He, Vav, He. It represents the first beings of creation. It literally means, it has a word that it means hand. And therefore it's implying like self-creation, self-copulation, self-generation. That deity always existed and nothing came before it. It implies the tarot card of the hermit, that wise elder that is cloaked, that is in silence, that is unknown, that carries his light, but cloaks himself from the outside world. He is perhaps in the world, but not of it, or he is shining light in the darkness. It represents the astrological zodiacal sign of Virgo, and therefore, if you're a Golden Donner, you're like, hey, it also represents yellow-green, flashed with red purple, you know. And then it represents the 20th path, which is this path right here, connecting the blue and the yellow, Chesed and Tiferet. So that's just a quick example of the kinds of things you can categorize. You know, I'll hear of Yud, and all those things come into association. Therefore, we can learn through symbols, and we can express the inexpressible through symbols. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? Each of these letters is a picture. It is a meaning. You know, the letter B doesn't really represent anything in the Roman alphabet, but the letter Bayet has thousands of years of history behind what it represents. Okay? So as we dive into these traditions, this is one of the primary things you should learn. I'll send you flashcards on this too. 22 letters, one a day. You'll learn it in 3 weeks. And it takes 3 weeks to make a habit, right? So you'll have a new study habit. You'll have your letters down, and your journey will begin. Okay? Let's just make it happen. So moving on. The Hebrew Aleph-Beth. The Hebrew alphabet. This is from the Sepher Yetzirah, chapter 2. The foundations of the universe are the 22 letters, which are 3 mothers, 7 doubles, and 12 single letters. He hath formed, weighed, transmuted, composed, and created with these 22 letters every living being and every soul yet uncreated. He hewed, as it were, immense columns or colossal pillars out of the intangible air and from the empty space. And this is the impress of the whole, 21 letters, all from the one, the Aleph, the first letter, the Aleph-Bet. And you notice that first letter in the top left represents a swastika, or represents the prima mobile, the hammer of Thor, the whirlings, the beginning of the whirlings of creation, from one center spinning out into a cross of 4 that revolves, eternally cleaving its way through the universe in creation and in destruction. So let's get into those concepts. Start simple. The tree as a whole. 10 Sephiroth. The 10 Sephiroth, these spheres you see, spheres or vessels, symbolize emanations or unfolding of the divine immensity of God. They form an abstract image of creation and represent the principles, powers, virtues, and properties of the divine, with which he emanated the universe, from the infinite at the very top, the white, to the finite, the material, earthly one at the bottom, resulting in the crystallization of matter as the kingdom of God. Now notice that we use the word emanation, okay? Qabalah, just like most, well, let's not say most, Qabalah, just like Martinism, just like some forms of Gnosticism, postulate an emanationist theory that, as opposed to creation. Creation implies that something had a beginning, something, therefore it has an end. Emanation implies an eternity. It implies an unfolding. Creation implies separation from the Creator. Emanation implies a oneness, a unity, that it exists in you and you exist in it. And this is very important to understand, is that the top sphere, the white sphere, is both above us, around us, within us, and between us. It is both circular and linear, which we'll get into later. On the left, you see the 10 names of those 10 spheres, going from white, Keter, the crown, gray, Hakma, wisdom, black, Bina, understanding, Chesed, the blue one, mercy, red, Gebura, severity, yellow, Tiferet, beauty, green, Netzach, victory, orange, Hod, glory, purple, Yesod, the foundation, and the 4 citrine, olive russet, and black, the kingdom, which borders in the Klipot, which we won't get into today. These 10 Sephiroth are receptive vessels or containers, kli, for the light, which is or in Hebrew. Kli and or. The light is or, is projective and it fills. The kli is receptive and feminine and is filled. They are receptacles to receive the light of divinity, which emanates and flows into them. They are therefore primarily receptive, right? But when properly harmonized, they learn not only to receive, but to also give back. Therefore, true Kabbalah begins to occur, to give and to receive. This image, you're probably familiar with, has been used on man. Right? The tree of life can be applied to the body of man. The crown is above you. Hakman Bina, mom and dad, are your brains around your ears. Your shoulders are the pillars of severity and mercy. Your heart would be Tiferet. It's not a perfectly scaled human there. Your hips would be Netzach and Hod. Your genital regions, your productive regions, would be the foundation of Yesod. And at your feet or below your feet would be Malkut. So, I postulate this with Our Father, with the Christian prayer, Our Father. This image that you're seeing here represents the first man, which the Kabbalists call Adam Kadmon. So consider the tree life as the body of man and bring to mind the closing of the Christian prayer, Our Father, which is, Thou art the king, for thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. I'm so used to doing it the Hebrew. Forgot the Catholic version for a second. The original Hebrew phrase is Ata Malkut Vegabura Vegadula Leolam Amen. And when you say that, you're literally drawing a cross. Ata, you touch the top of your head. Thou art. It is, as well as you are. You draw a line down to your feet, or you symbolically do it your heart. Thou art the kingdom. There's the bottom. There's the vertical line. The power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. So you're reaffirming a fact, a mystical truth about the nature of God, man, and the universe, and their correlations, which is the whole point of studying this. Connecting those 10 Sephiroth are the 22 paths. And like I said, there are many, many versions of the tree. We are just using the standard Golden Dawn style, the standard Western Hermetic tree. In this version, these 22 paths are, as you see here, they start from the top, Aleph-Bet, and they go in an ordered manner. Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zain, Chet, Tet, Yud, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samek, Ayin, Pei, Zadi, Kof, Resh, Shin, Tau. Other versions might have the three mothers horizontal, and all the planets diagonal, and all the planets up and down, and all the zodiacal signs horizontal, diagonal. While the nature of man represents, while the nature of the Sephiroth represents objective realities, so this 10 represents virtues, principles of the divine, principles like wisdom, like strength, like beauty. The paths represent more subjective experiences between these stages of consciousness, and they can be represented as perhaps the trials we have to go through to get to the next stage, or it can represent the transformation a force has to go through from one state of being to the next. So let's say if we're talking about water in its forms of solid, liquid, and gaseous. Perhaps you could say that solid, liquid, and gaseous are the Sephiroth. They are the states of being, whereas the transition between them would be the paths. So for it to go from liquid to solid, it would have to go through a cooling, freezing process. That would be that path. For it to go from liquid to gas, it would have to go through a heating and a boiling process, like created distillation. That would be that path connecting that, for example. The 22 paths are symbolized by the 22 letters, the Aleph-Bet, like we talked about earlier. Now let's get into the 22 letters in the rows of creation. So take a moment just to see this diagram. It's arranged in several layers, 3, 7, and 12. And we're going to pick those apart. In the center, you have the rose cross. Okay? That is the golden cross with the red rose. It doesn't have to be red, but it's red in this version. It doesn't have to be a gold cross. But the gold cross and the red rose of Sophia. The gold cross, we could say, represents, we'll do a whole thing on that another time. Let's just say it represents the perfected man. It represents the elements in perfect balance. It represents union between matter and spirit. Balance and harmonize. And because it's gold, it's the perfection thereof. The red rose in the center, the blossoming rose, one interpretation of it could be that it is the soul of the adept. It is his flaming heart, his ever-unfolding heart of love. It could represent Sophia. So Christ and Sophia. Christ the cross, Sophia wisdom or nature. And again, one thing you'll come to see in my classes is that I always say this is one way to look at it. This is one thing it could mean. This is one version of the myth. I do not like to tell people that anything is absolute. The only intention here is for you to take on the symbols so you can take on the myths, so you can interpret it your own way and find your own truth. Okay? Next, we have the inner circle with the three mother letters, as they're called in Hebrew. The three mother letters of creation. Aleph, Mem, and Shin, which you see colored in their elemental colors of air for Aleph, red for fire, Shin, blue for Mem, and water. Water and fire are obviously two contraries, and air is said to be the tongue of balance between them. These three can represent everything that three represents in any system you've ever studied. Every triangle, every set of two pillars and one that unites them, every set of contraries, black, white, up, down, being, non-being, the Tao, the yin-yang, masculine, feminine, neuter. So Shin, Mem, and Aleph, the foundation of creation, the triangle. Then you have the middle circle. These are your 7 double letters of the planets. So the 7 classical planets, as they're understood in the Renaissance and in pretty much all ages before that, up until we found Neptune and Uranus. So the 7 classical planets, and you see them arranged here in the form of the tree of life. There are some versions of this rose and some versions of the rose cross that are wrong, where Jupiter and Saturn are flipped. They should represent Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Mercury, Venus, Luna. That is the tree going down, the Sephiroth, except right here. And that is because there's a specific reason that Dalet is in the bottom. That is because Dalet is the door. And that relates to a mystery of the 5-6 initiation of the Golden Dawn. But essentially, the way you can remember this is it's the lightning flash. It's the tree going down, with Dalet being the door. We enter through Venus. We enter through love into the mystery. Then the outer circle. These are your 12 simple letters. Let me back up one second. Sorry. Back to the 7 letters. These 7 planets can represent in man, as well as in the universe, all forms of duality, such as that the planets represent. So each planet has it's called a double letter because you can pronounce it 2 different ways. For example, Tav can be T or Th, right? Pe can be P or Pe can be P or F, etc., etc. So these are your hard and soft sounds. And they also represent all the virtues and vices of man. So things like peace and war, love and hate, life and death, fertility and sterility, kingship and servitude. And they represent these dualities. Of course, we're trying to inculcate in ourselves the positive virtues and eschew the negative virtues. But in the end, in the highest forms of the tree, the highest levels of initiation, we should eventually transcend both of those. And lastly, we have the 12 simple letters, which also represent the 12 signs of the zodiac, as well as the 12 tribes of Israel, patriarchs, all that fun stuff, and the 12 banners of Yud He Vav He we talked about earlier. These 2 are arranged in a traditional manner, where at the top is Aries, the first house, the first sign of the zodiac, and then it goes around counterclockwise: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces. These are the 12 signs of the zodiac in the Wheel of Zodiac. When we get to our astrology lessons, if you've learned this, you'll already know the first steps. It's all a uniform system, and that's the beauty of the Kabbalah. Is that if you're studying witchcraft, you're studying any form of like Western tradition, mysticism, anything, and you're not studying the Kabbalah, you're missing out on all the great benefits the Kabbalah can do for understanding and bringing things together. It is a very harmonious system, which each piece fits together perfectly. So there we go. There's your rose cross. This could be a symbolic image of the universe created. 3 elements. So the golden rosy cross in the center. The 3 elements. Earth. Notice we didn't say earth. Earth is implied. Earth is implied in the union of those 3. It is the product. The 3 elements, the 7 planets, the 12 zodiacal signs. And these are in systems like the Golden Dawn or in many forms of Hermetic Kabbalah. These are the primary forces of creation that you'll be invoking, meditating with, coming to knowledge of, both within your sphere. You want to know how they work in your microcosm. How does my Taurus work? How am I possessive? How am I jealous? How do I hold grudges? What is my Venus like? What is my love language? What is my nature of love? How do I relate to sexuality? What is my Mercury? How does my mind work? How do I read? How do I communicate? How do I get stuck on things? Et cetera, et cetera. You'll come to study these things so in depth. The idea is we bring them to consciousness and we wake ourselves up from the sleep we're in. And any unconscious neuroses or patterns, positive or negative, things that are unconscious that we don't know we're doing, we want to bring to light and make conscious. That is the general work of most outer orders. And then the inner order, you bring it all together and you start the magic. Magic doesn't really begin until you have it, in my opinion. So there's the 22 letters. Learn that diagram, memorize it, draw it, get your colored pencils out, and just fill up a sketchbook. Genesis 1 to 1-3. This is going back to the elements. Remember, those are your 3 mother letters. Here we see it shown in a Golden Dawn 2-9 manuscript. The 3 mother letters are attributed here to the caduceus of Hermes. Fire above, water below, air in the center. And if you look close, you can see the Hebrew letters showing the tree, Keter, Hakma, Bina, etc., showing the Sephiroth. In the beginning, God created the heavens, that's the fire above, and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. We could go into a very long midrash about how this very brief passage is expressed through the mother letters, is expressed through the caduceus of Hermes, and one of the goals of Kabbalah is to be able to read a piece of scripture such as this, Bereshit, and see it in your mind's eye, to envision it, to have it unfold before you, to initiate yourself into the mysteries of God, and to re-experience creation. You should literally experience creation through this work, and that is what we could call one of your passes, or one of the tests that the work is actually progressing as should. Other goals can be the vision of Ezekiel, the vision of the Merkava, the beatific vision, the vision of God and his throne, and all kinds of other things. And the great thing about the Kabbalah is it's so structured and it is so uniform. If you do the practices with the right heart long enough, you will have these visions. And these changes will occur. Now, just because some people get confused about 3 elements, 4 elements, we're going to tap back into that a little more. Okay, 3 elements. There's the 3 arranged as you saw earlier in the rows, right? We got fire in red, water in blue, air in yellow. Male, female, neuter. Even though technically Aleph is masculine, but whatever. We'll consider it to be mercurial. In a white triangle. Bring it all together. A symbol of light. When we bring in the fourth element, perhaps if we want to Kabbalize it, we can show it as a cross now. Here you see a Maltese cross. And we see the fire, water, air, and earth as the product resulting from those. Okay, it's earth comes about after all of those do. And we're going to see how that develops through the divine name, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, Yahweh, Yahweh, Jehovah, etc., however you want to pronounce it. Over there on the left, you see Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh in its colors, fire, water, air, earth, which also represents, that image on the left is said to represent a man, or to represent a being. The red Yod is his head, the blue Hey is his shoulders and the top of his trunk. The Vav is literally his main portion of his body and trunk. The bottom Hey is his feet, his 2 feet. They also represent the 4 elements: fire, water, air, earth. The Jungian psychological types: intuition, feeling, thinking, and sensation, and all of those qualities. So, as we delve into these, as you work in the elements, you're going to focus upon, let's say we start at the bottom with earth. You're going to focus upon your material body, perception through your sense organs, feeling, touching, eating, drinking, seeing things physically, stuff that is manifest. When you're working earth meditations, you should plant something, you should grow something, you should create something, make something physical happen, get out in nature, and really tap into the word through that. When you're working air, Vav, thinking, the Ruach, you should be tapping into your faculty of rational analysis, the intellect, heavy reading, deep analysis, contemplation, writing, communicating with others, verbal speeches. Perhaps take up the breath practice of yoga. Maybe in earth, you were focusing on physical yoga and asanas. In air, perhaps you focus more upon the pranayama and the breath. When we get to the next level of water, Hey, feeling, blue, our emotions become paramount. Emotional values based upon what is pleasant, what is unpleasant. Our attractions, our repulsions, as well as the heart, our emotions, our feeling. And here is where, when we're working water meditations, we should become passive. We should become more maternal. And we're not saying that man is active, woman's passive, to have any kind of a patriarchal put down, whatever stuff. We're just saying the general nature of the active phallus and the receptive yoni, right? Lingam and yoni, which is a physical fact. So we're talking about becoming more receptive, more feminine, more motherly, maternal, nurturing. Maybe you don't push your opinion on others at this moment. You just listen, receive, and you try to feel your way through things rather than thinking through them or forcing your way through like fire. When you start working on fire, perhaps, which is the intuition. Now, yes, intuition is directly tied to our emotions, but let's just say we're talking about the fire aspect of intuition, the divine light, the divine spark, that eureka, that aha moment, that tip of our consciousness that can just reach the very, very bottom of deity. This is our creative aspect, usually non-physical inspirations. Here, we should create new things. We should highly express our opinion. We should be martial about things. We should go forth and conquer. Do what thou wilt. Perhaps when you're working fire, let yourself be a little bit arrogant. Let yourself go through that process, not because it's good to be arrogant, but just to experience it and to really dive into what fire is. And you'll see these expressed a little deeper, especially in the manual that we're going to give you. And then lastly, we have the fifth element, the quintessence, right? This is the spirit, which is symbolized in this diagram by the white top of the pentagram. You could see this pentagram as representing a man, a woman, a person, with their arms and legs spread out, standing in the sign of the Lone Star, the Lone Star State of Texas. Standing in the sign of the Lone Star is a pentagram, a shining beacon of light, composed of the 4 letters Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh that are now crowned by the Spirit. So, in Kabbalah, in most choice schools, you'll work through those 4 elements in reverse, like I said, and then you'll synthesize them all underneath Spirit, which is that quintessence, the lapis philosophorum, that spirit which comes only from above, which also represents in the Christian mystical tradition, Yeshua, the Redeemer, which is a very bad way to spell Jesus in actual Hebrew, but it works rather elegantly when we're working these initiatory systems. And there on the right, you see a diagram, a Kabbalistic diagram. At the top, you have the Tetractys, but spelled out with the divine name Yud, Yah, Yahweh, Yehovah. And each one of those is a divine name. Each one of those could be an entire paper. Then around it, you have all the 22 letters, in this case, going left to right. And then you have these little rays, these brilliant rays coming in or out. Those are the Sephiroth, Keter, Chokmah, Bina, etc., etc. You have other things going on. You have all these other scripture writings around it. And then here in the center, just like the pentagram we saw, you have Yud, Hey, Shin, Vav, Hey, and the Christ in the center and the cross, the man God, Yeshua, the Redeemer. Now you can work these traditions whether you're a Jew, a Christian, a Hermeticist, a witch, a pagan, a Gnostic. It does not really matter. You can use these symbols because they are universal. You can use the glyph in the filing cabinet of the tree without any denomination put on it. It is both a system of thought, it is a organizational system, as well as a way of life, as well as a philosophy and a spiritual tradition. You can use this in many ways. So if you're not immediately turned on by Christian symbolism, give it some time. And what I love about things like Martinism, the Gnostic Church, Golden Dawn, these things, is it allows us Westerners to return to Christianity on our own terms. It allows us to return to Judaism, to these universal symbols on our own terms. Because Judeo-Christianity is literally in our DNA. Like, let's admit it. We're all Westerners, right? It's in our DNA whether we reject it or accept it. It's a part of our culture and our collective unconscious. And we're able to return to these symbols, and we assert control of them. We take out the unconscious principle in them so that we can rule it rather than it ruling us. All right? Yeah, there's my soapbox for a moment. So there's your elements, 3, 4, 5, in different stages. Then we have the 7 double letters, the 7 classical planets. Okay, like we said before. Here on the left, you see them attributed to the Tree of Life in their usual format. Sometimes you'll see this Saturn one over here moved to this space where Da'at, the non-Sephir, would be placed. We're not going to deal with Da'at today. We'll go very in-depth in that in another session. But the 7 planets essentially represent your Ruach. It is, you could say it represents the soul of man. It represents his thinking nature, his soul. The spirit, literally Ruach means spirit. From Genesis 1:3 we read earlier, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. That is the Ruach Elohim, the spirit Ruach of God. So this Ruach, you can see represented over here by the 7 planets, arranged in the form of the Tree of Life that we've seen before, right? And each of them has an archangel attached to it, or an angel attached to it. Zafkiel, an archangel. Zafkiel, Zadkiel, Kamael, Raphael, Haniel, Mikael, Gabriel. It also has one of the letters. It also has its Hebrew name. So Shabbatai, that's where the Messianic cult of Judaism, the Shabbataians come from, the Saturnians, the ones who are here to break the law and bring about the Mashiach. Levana, the moon, Kokab, Mercury, etc., etc. These represent the 7 principles, the 7 virtues and vices within us that we seek to harmonize and balance. In the center of the diagram, you see a light that's representing the ever-present light of deity operating in all things. That these 7 are the Elohim, the 7 gods. But we always need to remember there are not multiple gods. We can conceptualize and anthropomorphize these things as multiple deities. But there's always one light shining in the center through all things and through all traditions. And then we jump into the 12 simple letters, 12 zodiacal signs. So we're taking that rose you saw earlier and adding a few layers onto it. Everything in Kabbalah, we're going to start simple. Once we understand that, we're going to add another layer. Once we understand that, we add another layer, again and again and again, until you have this beautiful painting. So here again, it's arranged 1 to 12, just like the astrological charts. You also have them in triplicities. You see this triangle? Aries, Leo, Sagittarius. Upright fire triangle. This is the fire triplicity. Cardinal, fixed, mutable, or initiating. Cherubic, changing into the next sign. That's going to happen for all of these. Cardinal Earth, fixed Earth, mutable Earth. See how harmonious these diagrams work? Once you understand the pattern, you can read anything. Cardinal Air, fixed air, mutable air. Cardinal Water, fixed water, mutable water. Then you also see in the center the 4 archangels. Raphael, Gabriel, Michael, Uriel, with the names of their Hebrew elements. So, like, yeah, we don't need to get into that right now. Actually, the names are the names of the tribes. And then on each one of these 12 zodiacal signs, you're going to see the name of a tribe. The tribe of Dan, Ephraim, Menashah, etc., etc. And then one of those 12 divine names we talked about. The other great thing about the Golden Dawn Kabbalah is that they codified the color systems. There was no uniform way of coloring the Tree of Life before the Golden Dawn. There were many ways of coloring it. The Bahir may say to do it this way. Parts of Zohar may say to do it this way. Abulafia may say to do it this way. And it's not that any of those are wrong. I just prefer this way because it is everything uniform. Everything fits the system. And it can apply to everything. It's also the way that almost every Masonic book these days is written. Or any magic book in the West. For example, Arturo de Hoyos' Scottish Rite Manual and Monitor uses all these colors without giving credit where they came from. So here's an example of those same 12 arranged as the tabernacle in the wilderness. So just soak that up for a second. And we've changed the English. We've taken off the archangel and put in the name of their, basically their birth mother, which lineage they come from. Because Exodus is not very clear on how they're arranged. And if you've ever taken the Holy Royal Ark, which I have not, they show you one arrangement of this, and I would argue that it's wrong. There is no one way of showing this, but this is my interpretation of how I think, according to Exodus, the tribes would be arranged. And that is the tabernacle in which many, many initiatory stories and myths come from the Golden Dawn to Freemasonry to just about everything. So we could say that these, if the 7, backing up, if the 7 represent these 7 principles of opposites, and they represent the fundamental aspects of our personality, you could say these represent the actors, the masks that we wear. So, Sun is your kingship, lordly aspect to yourself. Mars is your warring, commanding, domineering side. Jupiter would be your beneficent, loving ruler, the kind father. Saturn would be the old wise father, or the old crone, or the old. It could represent time. It can represent death. All those things. Luna could represent your mother, because we got to talk about your mom, right? It can represent your mother. It can represent your maternal nature, your birthing nature, your receptive nature, your emotional nature. Mercury could represent your intellect, your communicator, your also your need to travel. Venus would obviously represent your sexual nature, your love, your desire, your artistic nature as well, perhaps. So if these are the actors, the parts of our consciousness, such as like the child, the dad, the mom, the wounded one, all these things, then perhaps these 12 represent the backdrops. They represent the different ways that the different ways that our personality, these actors, interact, the ways that they are colored. So when we say that your sun is in Taurus, we're saying that you are a practical, stable individual who learns things slowly and methodically, and probably expresses themselves slowly and methodically, and tries to be clear, but can also perhaps be controlling, can be stubborn, and can be kind of have blinders on and be kind of dense, right? So I'm describing myself right now. When we get into the astrology lesson, we'll get deeper. Your sun is also going to be in a house. My sun's in the 4th house of Cancer, so it also takes on Cancer qualities. My solar nature then becomes also feminine in nature in some ways. It becomes very maternal. I like to hang out at home. I like to be romantic. I like to have a real nice hearth. So these are just some of the quick ways we can start to use these symbols to understand ourselves. We can look at our moon, our emotional nature. Mine is in Gemini. So, yeah. So let's do Venus. It's easier to understand. Oh, no, we're going to skip that. Hey, it's perfect. My moon's in Gemini. I go all over the place. I like to flip back and right, left and right, left and right. I speak really quick, just like Mercury does. I like to have lots of friends. My friends are my closest people. Through friends, I can communicate my emotions. I communicate my emotions verbally, etc., etc. So there's some ways you can use this to just make greater understanding. Now let's start to put this all together. 32, right? 32 grades, 32 paths. We have the 3 mother letters, fire, water, air, the 7 planets, the 12 zodiacal signs. Together, so that's 22. Together with the 10 spheres makes our 32 paths, which creates the initiatory structure of the Tree of Life. And like we said, we'll have an entire class on initiation into the tree. But again, to retouch, we start at the bottom, and we start to climb up this tree. These are various grades, etc., etc. Now, we've been going for an hour and 20 minutes. I intended this to be a 90-minute session, and I was going to go through the emanation of the 4 worlds. But I think perhaps we should cut this and open the floor for about 10 minutes of discussion or questions. And just showing you a little preview of some of the things we're going to talk about later, okay? So I'm going to feel free if you have a question, type it into the comments, or unmute your mic and just let her rip. Or if you guys are feeling up for it, we can keep going. Sure. Yes. Are you trying to say, like, for example, to get to here, the yellow one, maybe I could go this way, or this way? Sure. Generally, most initiatory systems, and understand that these are later developments. This is not necessarily the way that a traditional kosher Kabbalist would work it. But generally, in our Western initiatory methods, there's going to be one way of attainment and one way of creating or emanating. Let me tab over. The emanation is going to occur in this structure from the top down, from 1 to 10. It's called the Path of the Flaming Sword. And it's just counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. A lot more to it than that, but let's just say it does that. Now, The initiatory path would be going up the tree, and that would be symbolized by a serpent that starts at the bottom, and it's going to touch every path. It's going to go in reverse. It's going to touch every single one of these as it goes up, 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 boom, to the top. So generally, to get around to it, to reach this one, you're going to go up Tav to get to Yesod. To get to Hod, you'll get initiated into the earthly aspect of it, then the mental aspect of it. To be initiated into fire, you'll go through the earthly aspect of it, then the mental aspect of it, and then you'll connect water to fire. To enter into the sun, you need to be able to comprehend as much as you can death, the devil, and perhaps you'll have a little bit of a foray into some other things, and then the only way is the straight and narrow way up the Samek, the way of aspiration. As far as initiation regressing, that's probably for a later talk. I would say that once you get a grade, you get it, but you never conquer a Sephiroth. Just because you're a 5-6 or you're a whatever grade doesn't mean that Earth is perfect. Doesn't mean that your Nefesh is perfect. Doesn't mean that your emotional nature, etc., etc. One of my mottos is never perfect, always perfecting. Right? Perfection is unattainable. Aspiration is the goal. So we will continually work these cycles and continually be refining these spheres. Does that make sense? Yes, generally you would, if you're entering into a path, you'll be doing multiple ways of getting into that.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, we will talk about path working with tarot in later lessons. Right now, I'm trying to get people from a very beginner into getting versed in the language. The next session, we'll talk about the emanation of the four worlds. And as we progress on, we'll go into some practical things. If you guys, what is the best secondary text to learn from? Cool. That's a good question. Let me slide over here. So, again, why do we study Kabbalah? Albert Pike, in his 28th degree lesson in Morals and Dogma, says that Masonry, when properly expounded, is at once the interpretation of the great book of nature, the recital of physical and astronomical phenomena, the purest philosophy, and the place of deposit, where, as in a treasury, are kept safely the great truths of the primitive revelation that form the basis of all religions. So he's saying that this is our way of reading nature. Through the tree, we can classify and categorize every aspect of existence within and without. And it helps us to read that great book of nature and of man. He also says, the sages proudly wore the name of Kabbalists. The Kabbalah embodied a noble philosophy, pure, not mysterious, but symbolic. It taught the doctrine of the unity of God, the art of knowing and explaining the essence and operations of the Supreme Being, of spiritual powers and natural forces, and of determining their action by symbolic figures, by the arrangement of the alphabet, the combinations of numbers, the inversion of letters, in writing, and the concealed meaning which they claim to discover therein. And lastly, the Qabalah is the key of the occult sciences, and according to him at least, the Gnostics were born out of the Kabbalists. You could say it goes both ways. That's a whole different debate. But we don't need to take things too literal. So recommended reading, here's some of my favorite beginner texts. And I can screenshot this as well and send it to, I can post it. And I kind of put them in a general order. of what I would think is a good way to read them, starting from left going down, then right going down. Kabbalistic Tarot by Robert Wang is my go-to Kabbalah book, not only because it was my first Kabbalah book, but because I think it very well teaches how to approach the 10 Sephiroth, the 22 paths, and the 4 worlds quickly and easily. It uses the tarot as symbolic representations that make it easier to remember the images. It makes it easier to remember the concepts. I find it much easier to read than Mystical Kabbalah by Dion Fortune, which is also a great foundational text. I would say the 3 key texts are Kabbalistic Tarot, Mystical Kabbalah, and Israel Regardie's The Middle Pillar. I would recommend Kabbalistic Tarot. Get yourself a tarot deck and read that book. Start playing with it. Practical Guide to Kabbalistic Symbolism by Gareth Knight goes much more in depth. It's similar in structure to Mystical Kabbalah, but I believe it's better written than her book is. I think it's a little better structured. Then there's the Sepher Yetzirah. Now, like I said, the Sepher Yetzirah is very short, and there's a million versions out there. My favorite publication is Ari Kaplan's version. It collects several versions of the Sepher Yetzirah and has an extensive commentary on it, so you can see how geeked out this shit gets. 777 and Other Kabbalistic Writings by Aleister Crowley. It's not really a book as much as it is a reference book. But again, just like that table, your homework to study the 22 Hebrew letters, Crowley, before you could get initiated into the first degree of the AA, you had to memorize like 30 pages of that book. You had to memorize all these tables. That way, when they say the word Isis to you, all these things click in your subconscious and can come to conscious knowledge. I would recommend buying that book and basically just memorize it. As far as readings, his essays in that book, Gematria and Essay on Number, are fantastic expositions on how Gematria, Temora, Notaricon work in both the Hebrew and Hermetic systems. Godwin's Kabbalistic Encyclopedia is also an indispensable resource, despite that it is full of errors, and it is not something to use if you're looking for a kosher interpretation. It's a, even though he spells it with a C, it's a Q. Any Hebrew English dictionary, you got to have one of those for the kosher, because the Hermetic Kabbalah books are not enough if you want to get real deep into the etymology and things. Regardie's Middle Pillar is a great book because it gives you practical exercises to work with the Tree of Life and begin meditations. Really fantastic thing. And we'll get into that in one of our next classes. We'll get into that a little deeper. Today was just an expose in the letters, the elements, the planets, and the zodiacal signs. Qabalah, a very short introduction, is a short book by a guy named Dan. That's his last name. I don't remember his first name. It's just a general good one, kind of like Mystical Kabbalah. Now, after I think you read that side, you're ready for the deeper stuff. You're ready for Halevi, Kosher Kabbalist, The Way of the Kabbalah, Kabbalah and Exodus. That's a book which he goes through everything in Exodus and applies it to the Tree of Life in 4 worlds. And you start to see how you can use the 4 worlds. Adam, the Kabbalistic Tree, talks about the creation of the universe and the creation of Adam Kadmon, which our next lesson is going to be an in-depth expose on creation from Adam Kadmon through the 4 worlds of Absolute, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. So we'll see you later for that. Then there's the Tree of Life by Regardie. That's more of a study on magic in general and occultism in general than it is just Kabbalah. Transcendental Magic by Eliphas Levi is also more of a general occultism book, but it's just foundational. If you're going to do magic, you got to read that book. Window of the Soul by James David Dunn is like an abridged Cliff Notes version of Isaac Luria's teachings. And then the next book, Tree of Life by Menzi Pade, that is more of like the full meat. So think milk for babes, meat for strong adults. The Qabalah Unveiled by McMathers is just a friggin' fantastic text. But it postulates that you know all these other things before you get to it. Same with the Zohar. So these are my basic recommended texts.